we have a what's called a Mediterranean climate, meaning that it's like hot, dry summers, moist, cool winters. Every year we have a drought. Every year there's a period from about November through to April when we get very little, if any, rain. And then we have a period of moist weather. That's very Mediterranean. During those summers, we also get lightning, dry lightning, which can start bushfires. Lightning in winter is not obviously an issue, but in summer we get dry lightning storms and they can cause fires. And that's why we have had fires for millions of years. And that's why our vegetation, our ecosystems have evolved in the presence of fire. If they didn't have fire, those ecosystems would suffer. We as children grew up thinking that bushfires are evil, correct? And when you're teaching your children, they'll remember the Bambis of this world, that fire is an evil thing. In fact, fire is a friend as well as a foe. Fire is necessary for maintaining our habitats, for allowing our animals to survive. And I'll talk about that. Now, lightning, as I mentioned, yes?
Oh, I was going to say, like, growing up in the country, like, there was at least the bushfire once a year. So,
yeah. Whereabouts were you?
In Yapa.
Yeah, well, you know that. So, country people don't have to be convinced about this. They see bushfire and smoke all the time. But if you're in Subiaco or Cottesloe and you see us burning and smoking, you say, damn those guys, what are they burning for? You don't really understand. Whereas a country person will understand the very high necessity for burning.
Like we do like back burning and stuff.
Exactly,
on the farm.
yeah. That's right. So back burning is another term for controlled burning or prescribed burning. I did a study here. Over 3 years, we had something like 459 lightning-caused fires. Fires that were struck by lightning. And there probably were 10,000 lightning strikes, but only a few of those started fire. But even 459, if you allow those fires to grow without controlling them, you're going to have something like this happening. Virtually all within 3 days of burning, that's all I said, for 3 days, 85% of the forest would be burned. Okay, so fire is not just, it's just part of our environment, just like wind and storm and hail, it's part of our environment. And we have to understand that when we're constructing and developing land or subdivisions in the middle of our forest, that we are entering an area that has always had fire in it. Okay, it's like us thinking about the sharks today, the big topic, white sharks. We go swimming in the water, that's their land, that's their area. And we've got to do something about managing that. You can't expect them to change. And fires will always happen. But not only do we have fires from lightning, but all those red dots are fires caused by humans. And I don't know if you can see the yellow ones, there are some yellow ones, that's the lightning strikes. But the human-caused fires can cause up to 80% of our fires, maybe even 90% in some years. And you can see where most of it occurs, near Perth there, in the outer metropolitan near Perth. So we have this issue of fire being a natural part of the environment, but also being a foe, because it actually impacts on our communities and our health and life. So we have to do something about minimising the impact of those human-caused fires. Now, just let's find out what was how often did fires occur before we as white people arrived here nearly 200 years ago. The way you can do that is through studying what's called the grass tree, or the black boy, some people call it, the balga is the correct term for it. That's those grass trees there that they will burn even when the fire is actually very mild. And every time they burn, they leave a mark behind. And this was a study that was done here at Curtin University by Professor Lamont, driven by a chap called David Lloyd. And what they did is they ground back the outer bark, and it revealed a couple of things. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there are lots of little yellow marks there, and that's the annual growth. So these trees grow this way, not like a normal tree, they grow this way. So you can actually age them, you know how old they are. And these trees can be up to 300 years old, 200, 300 years old. But you can also see the black marks. And guess what they might be? Fire, yeah. Every time those fronds burn, they leave a combustion product behind, just black. So we can actually date those marks and find out how often did fires occur and in what year roughly. And so we've done that study. And here's an example. If you get into the prior to 1900s, you can see these marks occurred very regularly, every 2 or 3 years, right? But as you get into the more recent one, where we sophisticated people try and control fires, you can see the annual growth here, see that? But that's also the much reduced frequency of fires. In 1960-61 was our very worst bushfire ever in this state. Towns like Dwellingup all but burned out completely. Nanga, Holyoake, Carrydale. In that year, all those towns burnt. In fact, it's still regarded as one of our greatest natural disasters. But what it tells me is that we're doing something different to what fires were happening prior to the 1860s. And in the 1860s, not only did you have lightning strikes, but what else do we think happened? Why would fires be so frequent? Who would have been on the land then? Indigenous people. And the story with Indigenous people is fire was their greatest tool, their most important tool. It allowed new growth to occur so they can actually encourage the kangaroos and wallabies, whatever, to come to it so they can hunt them. And obviously, they also needed protection themselves. They used fire for signalling, they used fire for custom, for traditions. Fire for many, smoking out possums out of there. And they always carried with them a glowing sort of gabantia nut or a burning stick. They had no matches, obviously. And they lit up all the time. And if you ask even Indigenous traditional owners today, they look at a country and they say, that's dirty. And by that they mean it's too long without fire. Okay. So fire is a very important tool, and that's why you had that very frequent situation of, I get my very frequent fires that occurred in the earlier parts of our settlement. Aborigines and our white settlers conflicted. The settlers wanted their farms and didn't like what Aborigines were doing. And guess what happened? They would imprison many of our Aborigines and they put them into Rottnest Island. Most of the people that were imprisoned in Rottnest were actually a result of arson, they call arson. So they were trying to change. And that's really caused a significant change in the way we look at life. So our studies on this and other, looking back at the early journals of our early explorers and settlers, they said they saw a very regular and frequent use of fire by the Aboriginal people. We call them muas. Most of those fires occurred throughout the year. But if you burn so often, what do you think the fire would do? Would you get a lot of fuel? No, you wouldn't. So you get lots of mild, low-intensity fires. Welcome. That's okay. So they would be patchy fires. And we found that those patchy fires are very important for our plants and animals. Very large, intense fires that cover the whole landscape are actually the worst thing we can have. And I'll talk about that in my discussion here. But not all parts of the environment got the same treatment. What I call riparian zones, does anyone know what that means? It's your gullies, the wetter sites. And they stay wetter longer and therefore they don't burn every time an upper slope might burn. And it's in those riparian zones where most of our habitats of the smaller sized mammals and birds occur. Okay? So they may miss out on every 2 or 3 cycles of fire, and then after a while they'll get enough accumulated fuel and they will burn again. And that's what I'll be talking to you about. Now this is probably a remarkable sequence for many of you. Now this is a fire that occurred in Mount Cook, just out of Perth. They're 40 to 50 kilometres out of Perth, and that was a very hot fire. The next slide will show you this same site a year later. What do you think it will look like?
Green.
Very green. Yep. Here you go. 1 year later. Alright, now you show that to a North American or European, they won't believe that. Because it takes their vegetation 10 years to develop that, or longer. But because of our very much drier environment and our regular fires, our ecosystem thrives on fire. And you can see that. Now, too many of those very intense fires over large landscape is actually deleterious, bad for it. But small hot fires, as well as small cool fires, are fine by this environment. The trouble with hot fires is it affects your soils. And then you get your winter rains, and guess what happens to the soils? it washes down into the gullies, fills up the creeks, affects the water quality. That's why we don't want too many hot fires. And there's the 3 years later, or 4 years later.